Hello and welcome to episode 14 of the Matt Black Podcast. My guest today is Juli Flintoff. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you, Matt.
Good. Thank you for coming across to Barnsley. So you've travelled from West Yorkshire?
I have, not very far away, about 16 miles away in the beautiful little town of Ossett.
Oh, they've got the brewery there, haven't they?
They have got the brewery, they've got many things there.
It's terrible that I know that. That's one thing I know about the area. I think usually I would direct friends by telling them, a pub or a McDonald's. That's usually how you direct people in this day and age.
It is.
So I think it would probably be better than me trying to give an introduction about you, for you to give me the introduction, because there's a lot of things and a lot of moving parts to what we're going to be talking about today, aren't we? So it's mainly to do with the experiences that you've had, and this has been put into the form of a book.
Yeah.
And it's something that you're living with still at the moment.
It is. So I'm currently a carer for an individual who lives with dementia. I started off, my early years was leaving school, going to college and doing performance art. And then I got involved with the foundation course, which was art and design, and ended up going on to do a degree in fine art. So I wanted to originally use it as a therapeutical art to help people. And I'd got quite an interest in offending behaviour. Like, the kid who would probably not thrown the stone and everybody had run away, and he's just stood there looking round, not knowing what it was that he was supposed to do. And everybody had gone, and he was the kid that was lifted and, got into trouble. So it was this kind of concept that was in my mind. But I didn't know how to get into it. It's like cutting a record or, doing something big. You just don't know how to go from the college bit into adult work. So I just took a step out there and I wrote to Wakefield Prison. And I asked them how I would get in with young offenders. And I was so shocked because they invited me to go in and teach. And I did their summer school. So this was like in the early 90s. So I did their summer school, and I actually thought it was a place that I would be able to be comfortable in settling out a career. But I knew that at only 21, I needed to have more experience. So I went into the community and I used my art, and I was a community art development worker for 5 years, working primarily with people that were probably between sort of 10 years of age through to about 18, but did a lot of work with adults as well, teaching courses, and basically my car was a mobile arts resource centre. Okay. So I provided and facilitated and created arts and crafts activities throughout West Yorkshire. So that was Wakefield, Calderdale, Leeds, Bradford, Halifax, and Kirklees, everywhere. And I did that for 5 years. So one night I could be in Ilkley, and another I could be in Mixington at the other side of Halifax or Wakefield or wherever. But after 5 years of doing it, I thoroughly enjoyed it, but my yearning was still about these offenders. So I looked at other opportunities, and I saw an ad for prison officer. So I decided to sort of bite the bullet, and I put in an application, and lo and behold, I was accepted. I absolutely adored the job. I loved being in amongst people and using your creativity, but also, treating people with respect and dignity, but also putting firm boundaries in place in order to maintain security and my own safety, but seeing a difference that we could make through the different courses that were on offer there. And I think that's what helped me when I was struggling as a carer, that I knew that I needed to do something for myself, which was to do some courses to learn. So here I was at the time as a prison officer. I became a drugstore handler. I did lots of courses like the MVQ in custodial care, supervisory management. I did so many different things to sort of keep going. And I remember at the time, I'm actually having to do a 5 to 10 year projection of where I want it to be. And for me, it was like going through the ranks and achieving. But then it was almost like a curveball just came out of nowhere and smacked me between the eyes. I went on holiday with my sons who were probably about 7 and 3 at the time. And after having my second son, my hips had cracked. So it was a really bad case of pubic symphysis dysfunction. And I had to have 15 months physiotherapy. And I had to learn to walk again. So my physiology was kind of pants. I wasn't pain free for till my son was about 10. So I was struggling most of the time. But when he was 3, I felt like we'd got a choice to do something different. And so I went with my friend from church to Tunisia, and we went on our first family holiday for a long time. And by the way, I'd been a single parent for several years at that time, plus working full time. And we went away, and it was an amazing time. And it was almost like you could see that the world was this painting palette of opportunities, of culture, of just beauty to share with the children. So my 5 to 10 year projection then was of seeing everything, of doing everything, of living a life. And whilst we were there, it was April 2010, and we got stuck in the Icelandic ash. So we were there an extra week. Now when we got back, my mum had failed to tell me, because she thought that she'd got that week for me to be able to get my head round it, that my dad had cancer. So I came back feeling that I was suddenly open to having a life again, to actually come crashing down, and within 24 hours becoming a full-time carer for my dad who had cancer. I went to every appointment with him. I liaised on behalf of doctors and surgeons and everybody else, and did all the treatments with him. Sorted out carers and everything else. Within that first year, my dad started making concerns about my mum. And we just passed it off. And I was like, oh, it's just old age, she's fine, she's under a lot of pressure. And he said, no, and his words, because he didn't really understand, was, she's got that dementia. I said, what do you mean? Because this was like 2010, 2011, and it wasn't as well known and as prevalent, and we didn't have the kind of understanding. Or should I say, I didn't. I had no idea about much to do with it. And as time went on, Dad ended up going into hospital, and he came out and he had to do a convalescence in a home for 4 weeks. And it was during that time that the care staff started raising concerns, saying that Mum wasn't retaining information, that she was a bit confused and getting agitated, to the point that after a week or so they didn't feel safe, that he was safe being released into her care. So I had to take that over, just to ensure he could be released home. During that sort of following year, 6 months following year, she seemed to get more agitated than anything else. So I wouldn't have said that I identified that there was great changes, just that she was experiencing stress. My dad sadly passed away in August 2011. The week after, Mum was having a brain scan. And although they didn't give us the diagnosis immediately, which seems to be an issue that's occurred for many years, is that you get into this kind of system, and you, at the time, for me, I was battling to find out what was wrong. And if she had dementia, I just knew that there were so many different ones that I wanted to know which one, because for me, the forefront of my mind was to maintain her independence for as long as possible, to empower her, to maintain her skills, to keep her safe, and to ensure that she had the best quality of life in the comfort that she deserved. And so my thirst for knowledge that I'd had all the years before really came to the forefront. And I started by looking online, and I found a lady called Teepa Snow, who was this American charismatic woman that did teachings, and it was like this massive auditorium, and she would like have this participation of saying, right, you lot stand up now, everybody stand up, and she'll say, right, I want everybody that's had this to sit down, I want everybody that's had this to sit down, and then she'd say, you know, all you lot that are still standing, all you lot are all dementia. And they'd be like, what? That is the difference, that in society this would be the numbers in ratio. She said, and it was an eye-opener to make people realise that of the potentials. And I think that first night I did 10 hours solid listening to her and gaining so much information. So when I went back to the hospital, I really asked for Mum to have a lot of psychological tests, because the brain scan was determined that it was just degenerative changes associated with her age, because she was 80. And it didn't take in effect the other things that were going on that weren't my mum. You see, my mum was an accountant all her life, and all the bills were on red letters, so there were specific things to her that wasn't right. So I started making a diary, and I would speak to her about everything that we were doing, because I would never want to speak negatively in front of her, because the last thing that I wanted was for her to feel that she was a lesser of a person, or that anything that I was saying was being critical. So we would sit and we'd discuss things about how she was feeling, what she was struggling with, or if I thought that there was something that was amiss, I would ask her about it, and we would sit down and I would make notes. And then when we went to the memory clinic, I would pass them to the receptionist, and she would pass them to the doctor consultant who could read it before Mum went in, because I think that was the main thing. It's about always maintaining her sense of self and respect. One of the other things that I noticed about her is she knew what the questions were going to be, because she'd always been a very intelligent lady. So she knew that they would ask her what date it was. So she'd sit there either looking at the newspaper going, Tuesday, 15th of May, Tuesday, 15th of May. And she'd start saying it over and over and over again so that she could say it straight away. And the test that they gave that wasn't actually originally devised for dementia, she was always scoring about 28 for it, even though she was demising at home. After 2 years, we still hadn't got a specific diagnosis. So I'd asked the doctor if they would send, because she'd had psychological tests and things, if they would perform these at home. Now, when the lady came out to do that, I wasn't anywhere around. But she tested her on things like her ability to retain information, to actually perform a task, to cook a meal, to make a cup of tea, to walk out and around and about. And she was suddenly deemed as not being safe to do any of those things. Yet in the hospital setting, she was perfectly fine. She didn't need medication. She didn't need anything. So you almost feel as though you're fighting for that person to get the help that they require. But it's a little bit like when you take a child to the doctors. You get there and they've been coughing all week and they've been not feeling well and all the rest of it, and talk with that, oh, I don't feel well. And they get to the doctors and they're running around and they're absolutely perfectly fine. And it kind of gave that impression that every time I went, she kind of upped her game. Anyway, it was about 2013, 2014 that we got the specific diagnosis of vascular dementia and Alzheimer's. Now, I remember just before I went in, she grabbed my hand and she just said, whatever happens, just love me. Every time I say that, it catches in my throat, because I think that is the only thing that I have done throughout it. I've remembered that word of her almost with her heart reaching to mine and saying, wherever I go on this path, whatever happens to me, just always love me. And that's the core of her. That's not the dementia. Because when you go to a doctor's or you go anywhere, people are defined by their national insurance number, their date of birth, their address, their age, their whatever. There's always something in order to define who they are. Mum has all those things, but she also has dementia. None of it defines who she is as a person. So I've always looked at her for who she is today. No judgment, just who she is today. I think as time's gone on, and I've seen loads of different things on Facebook with regards to it's the long goodbye. It's the brain's shrinking. And a doctor once said, it's rubbish. It's true to some degree, of course it is. But it's rubbish that a doctor said that and put it on Facebook. It's just something that everybody's just continually really shared. But I think that all it's saying is the negative. It's saying what everybody's fearing. So people who may be losing certain abilities might be fearful to go to the doctors to say, have I got this? Because what is it that they're going to be faced with? The brain shrinking, the plaque that's forming, the inability to remember this, that it's a long goodbye. It's all about suffering.
Yeah.
Whereas if you flip the coin and say, actually, let's look at you living with this condition, not suffering from it. I think that changes the perspective of who you are, who that individual is, and how you treat them. So that's been my core throughout it. So with Mum, I got so much information from everywhere and anywhere just to assist her. My sons at this point, I think, were 12 and 7. The youngest one had just hit the precipice of getting over his granddad losing him. And here he had his grandma that was suffering or living with dementia. He couldn't understand it. He looked at her and he saw his grandma.
Yeah.
But when he fell off his bike and he was laying on the floor crying, she just stood there and looked at him. Now somebody might argue and shout at her and say, what are you doing? Why aren't you picking him up or whatever? But for her, she was looking. She knew that was her grandson. She could see, obviously, he's visibly upset. But her brain would not connect with what she had to do to help him.
Yeah.
It's a little bit like a row of dominoes. There's always that thing where well, I don't know if you were the same, but when we were younger, I remember me and my friends, we used to always look at TV programmes, and it might be, the fastest this or the greatest this, you know what I'm talking about,
Yeah.
the Guinness Book of Records. And one of them I remember seeing as a child that I was amazed about, and it was all these dominoes. And they were setting them out, and they'd flick it off, and it'd go all over these intricate things. And as children, we used to try to mimic that. But because we were so not as dexterous and we were so overly excited, somebody did inadvertently knock the actual table, and they'd all go down, and it's like, oh, you've got to start again. And then you get them, and it'd be, breath in, like, now it's who's going to be the one, whose turn is it? And then there might be an argument over that. But in the end, you'd tap that, and you'd see it flying down, and you'd be so excited, and then it'd stop. Because one domino didn't quite connect.
Yeah.
And that's the same. My mum stood there, and it just didn't flow all the way through to connect with her to step forward and take him in his arms. He found that really difficult. So my son came with me when he was 12 to do a course about dementia with the Alzheimer's Society. And there was a beautiful lady called Becky Dodd. She was only really young, but my gosh, her knowledge was phenomenal. And she taught us so much about the brain. She taught us so much about the different benefits that we were entitled to. Like, a lot of people don't think that they should get carer's allowance because it's a family member, so they don't realise that they're actually entitled to it, or that the person that they're caring for should get attendance allowance. And one of the lesser known things is that if somebody has a diagnosis with dementia and is receiving attendance allowance, that they're actually exempt from council tax. So there's lots of different benefits, and Becky shared her knowledge with us. And then we found out, I think we did 4 weeks. So my son did 4 weeks on the Saturday morning, just so that he could say it in children's terms to his younger brother, to understand that although you see her in front of you, she doesn't have the same capabilities, and that it's her brain that's just malfunctioning. And he put it as simple as that. My eldest son became a champion for dementia, and he lovingly looks after his grandma immensely. I've just been away and he's taken full care of her. He is phenomenal. The younger one, he went to a new school, and there was 3 people in his class, had ADHD, was on the autistic spectrum, or had some other hidden illness. And he became a champion for those children because he could see that the way in which they were responding or reacting wasn't their fault. It was to do with the circumstances and situations that they were in. So he would say, come on, I'll take you for a walk around the hall. So he'd put his hand up and he'd say, Miss, Jake needs to go out. And he'd go for a walk, and it calmed down, and it was better for the class. So he continued to do this. He'd been doing it about 18 months before I even knew about it. The teacher thought I knew, and it was in a parent evening class that she told me. So by living with it, but by being included in it, they've got an empathy and understanding way beyond their years. All too often, we push children to one side and we get on with things ourselves.
Yeah.
Because that is also the British way. We have to grin and bear it and get on with it.
So it's almost a protective feeling as well, isn't it? You don't want them to see the nitty-gritty in life,
correct.
But that doesn't always help them. Like you've said, he's developed some skills and understanding that most people his age would not have. So it's almost become beneficial in some ways.
It is, and it's this same thing as flipping the coin. We can be protective, but we're being protective from our visualization of that. Are we protecting them, or are we excluding them, alienating them from it? At the end of the day, this is their grandma, and it was so important for me, for them to have a relationship with her, and it was important for them to have that relationship, and same with my mum. Now, there was a time within her walk where her behaviour became very, very extreme. I mean, to begin with, I'd been walking her round Dorset, going from her house, meeting every morning and doing the same walk, religiously just doing the same walk, to ensure that she maintained that independence, that she went the safest route, and I made sure that I went every day to ingrain it within her. The place that she had something to eat was my next door neighbour. The place that she went for a pharmacy was somebody that I went to school with. The person that she bought the paper off was my dad's cousin. The bank that we went to was another lady that I went to school with. So she was cosseted without really knowing about it.
Yeah.
And with the finances, we were able to do to look after her with regards to her vulnerabilities by measures that the bank could put in place to support her from being taken advantage of when she was out on her own. There was limitations of what she could get. She was very, very funny. She knew what was happening, but then sometimes she'd have a lapse, and she'll say, "It's my bloody money. Why shouldn't I have it?" And the old Joan would come out. But honestly, I remember her having this conversation with her financial advisor, because I ended up having to go and scribe for her, so that she could look at the information and make the best choice for herself. Now, she'd always say, "Well, what do you think?" And I said, "But it's not my choice to make. It's not my choice, and it's not my money. So if I take the information and I'll lay it out, this is this, and this is what happens, or this is the rate," and I would leave them there for her to mull
Just
over.
Advise,
yeah, exactly. And one of the times that we'd gone in to see this financial advisor, he became a very good friend. She said, he'd asked her, he said, "Anyway, Joan, how's rest at family?" She said, "Well, I've decided." She said, "I'm having no more." And I just looked at her, and he looked, and we just burst out laughing, because she had this way of just, putting something in there that was off the wall. Now, going back to the boys, they've really been empowered themselves, because they step up and do it rather than being asked to do it. And as we said, they're included as opposed to excluded. So when we've sort of gone anywhere or done anything, it's always been that we've done everything as a family. So my mum became part of that family. We were our own little unit, because she would go to places like Alton Towers with us. And for instance, we'd laugh and joke with Dementia, because we had to have a humour about it. So if we went on to, it's not even a roller coaster, it's a children's ride that's a train that always says choo-choo, you know. And so we got on it, and it's a tiddy little thing, but it does set off quite fast. So it goes out of the thing, whips its way around, and then I was laughing all the way through it, because she was screaming on this little train. And then we got back, she sort of looked at me with her face really white, and I could do nothing but laugh at her. And then the guy said, shout if you want to go again. And everybody's going, yeah. She said, I'm getting off. And then it set off again. And she'd forgotten, we'd walk around, and then she'd forgotten that she'd been on it and wanted to go back on it. So there was humorous things around it, like going on a big ship thing that neither me or Coburn wanted to go on, but Corey at 4 was desperate, so he'd go on with Grandma, and all you could hear is her going, woo! Woo! Every time it went up or down. But she became part of us, and we became part of her. One of the things when things get difficult is you do tend to kind of morph into one another. And I found that as time went on and her abilities became lessened or more weakened, that she was relying so much more. So I was beginning to feel a pressure. And the pressure felt like a bit of a weight of the world on my shoulders at times. And became a bit of a weight. And so as we went out to do things, her behaviours were becoming more stressed. So because she was still living on her own up until about 2016, it was a big place, and it seemed as though almost like the house was playing tricks on her. You know, as you or I, if we've just gone upstairs for something and then we've got there and thought, oh, what it now? We might go back to the kitchen and think, oh yeah, I was going for that hot water bottle, and go back for it. Something will jog your memory. Well, Mum was, because it was a big place, she might have gone into the kitchen to make a cup of coffee and thought, what have I come in here for? So gone back to the next room. What have I come in here for? So kept going from room to room thinking, what have I come in here for? Because she was on that loop of going back to decide, but it just didn't, she'd no idea. So she was going round and round. And we started terming certain behaviours with words, associative words, so that we weren't, again, talking negatively. So, for instance, one day I'd been learning Spanish, and a television was up at 34, so you can't take information in when that's going at this side. And she didn't speak to us, she was just glued to the TV, so I'd gone into another room. But because I wasn't there, it was almost like I'd become a comfort blanket. So she had come into the room that I was in and not see me and walk through, open a drawer, walk back. But 30 seconds later would keep doing it. Then she would get up, and you couldn't detract her from it. She'd go into the back, take some clothing off the washing line and put it on a line round the side of the house, and then come into the... And it kind of kept going on and on and on. Now, you can sit there and in your normal, natural way react to those things. And don't get me wrong, don't think that I'm perfect and I get everything right. I certainly don't. There's been many times that I've had to swallow down words of criticism for uplifting kindness, and there's times where I could react and be quite cross about something, but it's how you express those things that are important, that it's not at the person, and that you try to separate the behaviours from who they are. And so I tried to step back and think, okay, what is it that her behaviour is that she's demonstrated, that she's trying to convey? And I realised that for me, I could pick up my laptop and I could do some work if I wanted to. I could pick a book up and read it, or I could turn the TV on. My mum couldn't do any of those things, but equally she hadn't the capacity to be able to know how to quench her own anxieties, her own restlessness. And so what she was demonstrating was an inward stress that was manifesting outwardly. So I looked at what we could do, and she went to a daycare centre. So I found when we went along, for me it broke my heart to think of my mum in amongst these people, because now I had to recognise this little old lady where that's not how I'd seen her before.
Yeah.
And it was this kind of hall that, no disrespect, it didn't feel like it was, it had atmospheric, you know, it was atmospheric or anything. And I hated to think of her being there, but I had to take my thoughts and feelings out of it because it was nothing to do with me.
Yeah.
It's about that person and meeting that person's needs the best that you can. So she went for the Thursday and she loved it. She absolutely loved it. She got up the next day and said, "Am I going again today?" She'd remembered about it. It had had that much of an impact on her. Now, they had, on a morning, they would do some art-based things. They might have dancing on an afternoon, or they were having a singer in, and they always had a really lovely 3-course meal as well. And then I found out that they actually came and picked you up. They could come and pick you up on their little minibus and drop you off. So here we had something that was totally independent of us. It was all about my mum. It was almost like when she was a kid and they used to take them out on trips at school, or when they used to go to the working man's club and they go to the seaside.
Yeah.
It was her going on a trip, but more importantly, it was people her own age. It was people that she could relate to.
Something social, isn't it?
It was.
It's almost like she's got her own little circle there. You say that independence, and it's something that she enjoys. But when you, obviously from us looking in, when you say you look into a room like that, you think you might see it as that's a room full of sadness. It's a lot of people that's, as you say, suffering or living with those things. But to the people that are going through that, they say she thinks it's the best thing since sliced bread. So, you know, it's perspective, isn't it? She's loving that. So
it is, and that's the thing. What you've just said then, that she doesn't know any difference. She's in that and she's loving that, and our perspective. And so that brings it back to the things on Facebook of our perspective of things. The cruelty, my mum always said that the things that she hated in life was a liar and a thief. Now, dementia, especially around vascular, it lies to you because you feel as though you've got it licked. You feel as though you've got it sorted, and all of a sudden there's this great big crash.
Yeah.
But it steals the person right from under your nose. It takes them bit by bit by bit. But what people fail to see is that it steals the carer's life as well. It steals it completely and can reduce you to nothing, so that it becomes this minuscule world that centres around that person, around their needs, so it can become task orientated, and it becomes where your world is cut off from everything and anybody else. So that's where you lose yourself, and the isolation is so debilitating because it can just be you and that person, which is why it is so absolutely important that people do not do it on their own, and that we don't have that British thing of, you know, get on with it and
Stiff
this is
upper lip.
yeah, that's the thing, because it's through breaking down that barrier that you actually access the freedom into your life and their life. Because my mum, when she was put in an environment that I would not have chosen, but that was right for her, she flourished. She absolutely flourished. So for her flourishing, like, I was so much happier as well. And it gave me that day in order to be able to do other things for me.
That's it. It's when we talk about those day centres or elderly homes and things like that, people always make the joke, "Don't put me in a home," and things like that. And people not everyone, but some people feel a guilt for putting people in those situations that, especially if they have to go into elderly care. Families are feeling that they've failed parents for not returning the care, but sometimes it's almost impossible, whether it be a financial situation. There's so many other factors, isn't there? But there's so many reasons why sometimes it's better for someone to live in a place where they will be kept safe, and there's professionals who receive regular training for that. Because sometimes, your situation is different because you seem very well trained and educated in that category, but there's people that they don't understand what they're doing or what the person needs, so they think it's for their own good when they're making them do things, and it might be causing so much distress, and obviously it has a ripple effect to everybody else in the family, doesn't it? It's we've had the same kind of situation in my family with grandparents experiencing exactly the same thing, and the effects and the way that it dictates the life of the people around. Like my mum was working full time, as she still is now, as an elderly carer, was still going to look after my nan, running my granddad round to appointments and things like that. And she said, I'd love to get a little car like yours, but I need this one because this is the one that gets your nan and granddad in and out perfectly. And she wouldn't go anywhere. She wouldn't go out. She didn't drink because she needed to be there, ready to go as soon as, even if, say, my aunt was going to go and sort out the things that they needed doing that morning or that afternoon, my mum would literally, I need to be there just in case something happens. So it's like you're almost like put your own life on hold to just be there for them.
I think it's a compelling thing on the inside because it's born out of an absolute love for that one person. That's the only thing that can describe it.
Yeah.
You love that person that much. That person, if it's a parent, because obviously, it's not always a parent. It could be a child that you're looking after, and it's not always about dementia. There's other things that you care. It might be, somebody's had a car crash and they found themselves in this predicament, because being a carer is not always, unless it's a profession, it's not always done by choice.
Yeah.
It's that curveball. It's almost like the coin spinning, and you're saying, is it heads or tails? Am I going to go this way? I'm going to go that way. But then this hand smacked it down and stopped you in your tracks.
Yeah.
And this has become your life. So you now have to look at how you function. But because you want to get it right, and as you said, your mum, she's compelled to be there because this person has looked after her all her life. She's brought her up, she's fed her, she's taught her to walk, to run, to do all these things.
Yeah.
It's that undenying love for that one person that you're compelled to look after and to do your very best for. And I think that's a testament to who our parents have been to us, as to why we do that. And like my mum was always spinning plates. She was always the glue that kept everything together. She was always the person that you could run to for advice, that you could rely on, that would jump in the car at 1 o'clock in the morning with a vodka bottle to say, come on, let's just have a drink. We'll put it all behind us. Tomorrow's another day. There was always that ability to say, you just don't know what's round the corner. Yeah. Come on, keep going. So for them, when we're looking after them, it's a different thing of you don't know what's around the corner. So you're putting as much in as you possibly can. I would tell you now, and my boys laugh at me, but for the last 10 years, literally every Christmas, every birthday, for my mum, it's been, this could be a last. So we're going to give it everything that we've got. Yeah. Because you want to remember that last one. It's so fundamentally important. And it's like, anything that we do together, it's got a bigger theme, a bigger meaning. Yeah. It's like people will often say when they've lost somebody, I can't remember the last thing that I said. I hope I wasn't flippant. I hope I didn't say something in anger. Yeah. I make sure every single time I leave my mum, I pray with her. I put her in God's care. I thank him for her. And I always say, I love you. That's the last thing I will always say, because I want to know what the last words were that I said to her. 100%. And I think if we know in advance about the you can't always know the course of events within the fact that obviously there's so many different types of dementia and it affects everybody differently. So therefore, you can't know how it's going to be, but you can do some planning along the way.
Yeah.
Like when I was saying about the course with Becky, she taught me the importance of doing a living will. Wouldn't have even known anything about that, but it gave Mum the ability to actually have control later in life to say who she wanted caring for her, where she wanted to be, what she wanted to happen, even who she even wrote her own eulogy.
Yeah.
You know, she went into, once she knew that she could have these abilities and these choices, oh my goodness, did she crack on with all these things? There were no stopping her. Because this was probably between 2012 and 2014. She wanted to put everything into place.
So is that almost like an alternative to a power of attorney almost?
No. It's really important to also have a power of attorney. A power of attorney is appointing a legal person to make the choices that are, to make the decisions that are right for that individual, that are in their best interest.
Yeah.
I mean, you're governed by the Mental Health Act, obviously, with it being dementia, but it was a matter of, you've got the health and welfare, and you've also got the financial side of it. Now, if Mum hadn't have done that herself, then anything that I would have needed from my mum, I would have had to put an application into the court continuously to keep getting a go-ahead to use her money to look after her in her best interests.
Yeah.
But by putting a power, and that's so costly. So although people might think £500-600 to put a power of attorney in place is excessive and you probably won't need it anyway, I would absolutely suggest that yes, that you do in the long term. However, it also comes with a great responsibility. I now, based on my mum's finances, I am very, very clear with keeping everything separate. I keep a diary of anybody that comes to her house, anybody that sees her, whether it be a district nurse, a doctor, whoever, any symptoms that she's got, because I'm not going to remember last week, 3 years ago. So since 2016, when she fundamentally came to live with me, I've kept a diary. So I know what the course of events have taken over those years, when she started maybe slipping a little bit, when she's maybe gone in for respite, any problems that she might have had, anything that we've purchased, or for instance, recently in the beginning of this year, we noticed that damp was coming in at the top part of the houses, and it was in both the children's room. So obviously for their health, we've got to deal with it. But when we came to pull the wallpaper, it literally all came off because it had been coming in through the walls and we hadn't realised it. And if we didn't deal with it, then that was the biggest asset that would cost a fortune. So we had no option but to fund, the roof. And inevitably it's Mum's property, so it has to come out of her finances. Yeah. But I document it. I make sure I've got receipts for everything. They're clipped into the actual diary. There's any money that comes out of her account, it's all itemised. There's envelopes so that if we've got a float of, say, £100 that she used to have before, and she'd go to the cafe, it'd be like £10 cafe or whatever. It's all recorded.
So is that recorded like a logbook in the same way that you would in, say, children's care, adult care, elderly care, or is that mandatory, or is that just something you've put in because it's going to make life easier in the long run?
The reason being is because what the dementia nurse had said to me in the first instance was that most of the time he found that people, and specifically with dementia, because that's what his job was, that families seem to dissipate. So there was usually one person that ended up taking over the control or the responsibility being sheltered to them. So as I was in that predicament, and also the attorney, allegations were made to try to remove me in order to get control of her money. and an investigation was opened with the power of the Office of Public Guardian, who determined that there was absolutely nothing to answer to because everything was clear and it was all laid out. That's just me with an accountant mother who taught me to make sure that you're transparent, you're open, that everything's there, because
you've even got to write down the bad and the mistakes, haven't you?
This is it.
It shows that honesty, that integrity.
And that's the point. It's difficult. It puts so much more time and effort into things, but in the long run, if that information is needed or somebody wants to ask a question, I can give you 8 diaries, 12 files there and whatever else, and say, there you go, you can have a look by all means. This is my time that I've done caring for her.
Yeah.
But it came from that absolute love, and there's not one person whatsoever on the face of this earth that has been in my company or that have witnessed the care of my mum that would say any derogatory comment, and I can absolutely hold my hand up on that, because every single person, whether it's somebody as high as doctors and surgeons and whatever else, down to, you know, a cleaner that she once had, they would always have testament that she is given the best quality of care. And I think it was 2 weeks ago I did a filming for Channel 5 and ITV, and the amount of people that have come back and said, oh my gosh, your mum looks so beautiful. Like, she's now 93 years of age. She was sent out of hospital 2 years in November, end of life, and given 2 weeks. We give her the best quality care possible, and we give her the impetus to keep going because our love stretches so deeply. And that lady in the beginning said to me, just love me. So that's what we do.
It's amazing, to be honest. I mean, when you're talking about, you know, anyone trying to question, it's like, we've spoke briefly on the phone once before we've met today, and I can feel that love and that passion that you've got for her care. You know, it's amazing, really. There's people amongst us that are very much the same, but there are people that they're not so lucky to have people around them that have that same kind of drive to care for them.
Matt, that's one thing that absolutely, honestly, it breaks my heart to think that there are so many elderly people in the country that, you know, we still see it at Christmas, that they're not going to see anybody.
Yeah.
You know, that they might have family. Carers tell you that they've got family, and they might only live a mile, 2 miles down the road.
They don't come and visit.
And they don't make an effort. When it was in COVID, my mum had ended up going into a care home. She'd fallen. She'd gone in for a week's respite, and she actually fell and broke her femur while she was in there. And then she ended up getting stuck through. To begin with, it was fine, because going back to the daycare centre, when she'd gone into this particular home, and it was one that I chose based on the output. A lot of places, you were touching on it earlier, about people feel dreadful and feel guilty because they don't feel that they can cope with them or look after elderly people in their own home or whatever, or in their home or their own home, and feel bad about having to put them into a home. It depends on what the home is. Yeah. It depends on what the home offers. There are some, and I will hold my hands up and say that I have had some bad dealings with certain people, certain homes, where individuals, it's like going back to why our parents don't want to be put in homes, is the fear of being sat around a room and just staring at just a TV on, and they just sat there. I've been into a particular home where I saw people being made to sit there, and then one of those hospital table trolleys at the side of the bed was stuck in front of them in order to stop them from moving. Yeah. And it went on persistently, and they wanted me to keep my mum in there. And it's like, no, she's not staying there. But social services wanted me to relinquish responsibility because she was going downhill. And I said, no, that's more the reason to bring her back.
Yeah.
And she ended up with that home going from there into a hospital setting because she was so severely dehydrated, and the doctors thought I'd done that to her. And we're talking about the police, but actually this was a home that had not given her the food. She'd lost drastic weight in 2 weeks while she was in this one, and they'd not hydrated her, so she was on different drips. I think it was glucose, potassium, and an IV for antibiotic, because she'd been bitten and she'd got an infection in her leg, and so she'd ended up bedridden. She couldn't feed herself because she wasn't able to do that, and they were doing the same old trick, leaving it on a table next to her. She could neither reach it nor give herself the food, and so she went unfed and she went without this. That's what determined that she could have passed away. But this other home that Mum had gone into by COVID, completely different, one that I'd sought her out. And here they had a pop-up cafe. They had, this would happen constantly. They would have times where it might be an Italian day, or it could be a Chinese meal day, and they were all together. They lived together, they lived seamlessly together. It was so cohesive and integrated.
Yeah.
Everybody was welcome. You felt like, and the beautiful thing that I remember the carers saying is, this is their home that we happen to work in.
Yeah.
It wasn't a matter of that's their place and they're getting with it and it's task orientated. It's their home.
Yeah.
And that was massive. And they had a band in every alternate week and on a Wednesday, and a singer every Friday. They had arts and crafts going on. The amount of things that my mum made in there was amazing. And she was so exceptionally happy. So she stayed just because it cost a fortune for us, but at the end of the day, she was really, really happy. And she'd gone there as a convalescence and stayed because she was thriving. I mean, I still went down, picked her up and took her shopping, and she still came for a Sunday lunch to me, and I still went down and had food with her. We still did exactly the same as though we were living independently. And I actually felt like I was a daughter again. I felt like I'd been given a second life at that.
Yeah.
And that she'd been given a second life at being a grandma and at being herself. But then when COVID hit, she went downhill. Yeah. Because all the activities were taken out. Most of the time they were left in their own home because they couldn't integrate. So I had to fight to get her out. And that thing about the last thing that you're saying is I love you. That thing about giving them a quality of life. I absolutely went into such a depression because I felt like I was suddenly failing her. And I loved her, but it was from afar. And I was panicking because I needed to get her out there because I didn't want her to be a statistic of COVID.
Yeah.
And that nobody could go and pay their respects. Nobody could do anything. And they were now suddenly bringing her out. She'd put so much weight on, and they were bringing her out in a wheelchair, so she was now not being mobilised, whereas I'd been doing, because of the break in the leg, I'd been doing physio with her every single day, and suddenly that wasn't being done. So we fought, and it had to be, we had to have all our injections, vaccinations, and she had to have hers before we were allowed to actually get her out. And she came out March 14th, 2021. So she's been back with us another 3.5 years. I thank God for that, because I honestly do not think that we would have had that opportunity if he hadn't been there somewhere looking after us all. And it was during those times where isolation, everybody was feeling it, but it got me to thinking about, looking after my mum and life continuing again, because I'd got it back to some degree and now it was changed and turned upside down, and her behaviours were so extreme. I mean, she was seeing things like they were having funerals on her garden, and the big white flowers that had fallen off in autumn or whenever it was, that they were skulls that had been left behind. She was terrified. she was pulling curtains too, so she would only have them open just a slither so that she could see out, and wanted us to live like that. And then she was thinking it was in April, and she was thinking it was snowing like Billy-O outside, were her words. And another time that through the night she'd had no sleep because there were nuns baptising children down the landing all night lot. And then she'd say, but don't tell them off, because when I fell they picked me up and they looked after me. And she was so convincing. And I think that she was now distorting everyday life with a dream world, and she couldn't differentiate the two.
Yeah.
And this was further seen in when she was watching TV. She would see 3 different things that were going on. So I remember at a time it was these pirates had kidnapped a couple, and somewhere in America there was terrorists going on, and then there was a celebrity who was having a baby. And I came in and she was panic stricken. She said, oh my gosh, I'm so worried about that girl. We need to do something. We need to do something, Julie. And I said, what girl? What's wrong? And she said, that lady, she's pregnant. The pirates have got her pregnant and they've taken her away and they won't let her out. And the terrorists are going to get her. And it was like all these 3 things just became one thing. But she believed it to be true.
Yeah.
And that's the difference. You can sit there and you can argue with them and tell them it's different. You can tell them your reality, but you're putting it onto them. And you're not going to get anywhere, and you're just pushing more distress. I'm not saying that you should try to hoodwink, or you should try to make them believe anything that what they're saying is true or not true. Sometimes you just need to listen.
Yeah.
And reassure them and give the support.
I think you say it causes further confusion. It sometimes causes frustration, and it leads to aggression and even with people who have never been aggressive historically start showing signs of, well, sometimes acting out physical violence, and which is obviously a big shock to family when they're not expecting it.
Yeah.
But it's weird when I think about, like, we're kind of more forgiving as family members, but when you go to a care home, you've got all different types of people. I don't know a way to kind of put this politely, really, but there's people that they share that kind of drive that, say, you would have or my mum would have in looking after someone. But then there's people that work in care homes who also just want some money for the weekend, and they might care a bit, but they don't care enough. And the big problem with that is that it's quite easy to get your foot in the door, to work in care, to start just being a frontline carer somewhere. As long as you've got a clean slate when they do your criminal record check, and you can tell your left from your right, you're pretty much going to get your foot in the door there. And there's, when you've got people who can't work in a restaurant and get food orders correctly or care that they're correct, that worries me, that people like that can just go out, and they're supposed to be giving people food and drink at set times. They're supposed to be turning elderly when they're in the beds. They're doing all these different things for them. They're supposed to be engaging with them, but they're not. They're sat on the phone, or they're ignoring them, or they're making them wait, or they're putting them in front of bargain rather than playing dominoes or whatever it should be. Something to keep them going, basically, because it's like a use it or lose it situation, and that's not just for people with dementia. That's for everyone. We all should be keeping our minds active, even more so for the people that are going through that. It needs a bit of a shake up, in my opinion.
It does. You're absolutely right. The difference between your mum, myself, and the carers that you just spoke about is we're unpaid carers, and we do it through love, as I said before. They're doing it for the money. It's easy to be able to take down information and rewrite it and say, yeah, I've got that now. And there are companies that I've used myself who, on paper, it looks fantastic.
Yeah.
They've got these qualifications or whatever else. They've probably been helped through them as well, just so that they've got it. But in the field, that's totally different, because you can't teach common sense. You can't teach it. I mean, I have been 6 months now trying to iron out the positioning of my mum, because she has got spondylosis of her neck and spine. So she's bedridden. She doesn't have a great deal of things that she can do. She doesn't have a great deal of choice in matters now, because she doesn't verbalise as much as she used to. But one thing that she can have and should have is comfort.
Yeah.
So I have ironed it out. She has 2 carers 4 times a day for 6 months. And the last month, I have literally gone on and on and on and on and on, because you need to take note. And we've turned and we've showed her. I've even simplified it to say, if her head is at that corner, her bottom is in the middle of the bed, then her feet at this corner, then she's on a diagonal, she'll be in the right place. If you just put these cushions there, it's perfect. And I look and she's in a zigzag, or her legs bent the other way, or what. And I've even got cushions, like a long 4-foot cushion that she can wrap herself round to maintain that position. And I'm still fighting on a daily basis for the simplicity. Now, within that, I have a couple of really beautiful ladies who desperately want to get it right, but are probably thinking too deeply, and a little bit like a parallel park. The brain is thinking, I need to do that, I need to turn left foot, right to go in there, and can't quite get it right. But their heart is in the right place.
Yeah, there are some people that work in care that I'm not saying that everybody is
Yeah,
like that.
no.
There are some amazing people. You know, I've met a number over 6 years when I was doing
Phenomenal.
it, and you just think, wow, what a person. You know,
Exactly.
and the things that they have to endure sometimes on an almost daily basis. You just think they shouldn't be getting minimum wage for this.
Absolutely. And I think they've got to be really tough exterior.
Yeah.
As well. And I think they've got to really fight to be able to, because I know a few people in the care homes that desperately want the time to be able to sit and talk and humanise these individuals that they're looking after, instead of having to do all the tasks and running round and actually seeing themselves running backwards, because they haven't got the time with all the notes that they've got to take and the people, as you say, that they've got to turn or get supervise this, that and the other. I know at one, there was about 25 people and I think 3 carers on. How can you manage to wash all those people and get them up efficiently and monitor what somebody else is doing while 2 of you are in this room? It's an impossibility. I think we've had a big drive, a government drive, to bring a lot of nationalities over that are absolutely, they're rushed off their feet and to some degree are exploited, but their kindness and their absolute love that's inside of them and politeness is amazing. And I think we could learn a lot from them. We really could, because they're giving their heart and their soul to your mum, your dad, your whoever, and they're getting little praise for it.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think when you're out in the field going from room to room, you're rushing from place to place to place without getting much as far as money with regards to the time that it's taking. So sometimes you can do 2 hours actual physical work, but you've been driving about and sitting waiting for that next call for the last 4 hours, and you're only getting paid for 2. So to be out of the house for 6 hours but only get paid, it's crazy.
Yeah.
It does need a shake up.
I think there's when you see some of those amazing individuals we talk about, some of them, they get to a point where they end up stepping out of that profession because they get put under so much pressure, because a lot of homes are short-staffed to a point where they do open up the holes in the net a little bit more, so they let people in to work there who probably need a lot of training, a lot of development. But if they're not willing, it's those really driven people that they're getting all the work to do while someone else is, I don't know, taking a little bit too longer in the laundry room or whatever they're doing. You know, they're just kind of hovering around and not getting getting the work done, and then the homes lose the good staff,
They do.
and then they just have to replace them quickly with more of
Absolutely.
the ones that are lacking. So that's how you see a lot of these homes that sometimes they're at a good or an excellent, they can go downhill very quickly. And yeah, I think like you say, they just have to only have to have the ratios ever so slightly out. They've not got enough staff to look after all the people, and it's you know, it's the people that live there that are suffering then.
My sort of rule of thumb is I look at the staff and the management's attitude towards their staff, because if they're not looking after their staff, and primarily the ones that are the heart-driven sourced people, then they're not going to be able to look after my mum. So it's about, it has to come from the top and it has to come down. And instead of sitting in offices, you need to be out on those landings and in those rooms talking to those. You need to set that example.
Yeah.
You need to come and take some pressure off, because if you've gone through the ranks, you know what it's like.
Yeah.
So we shouldn't be thinking, oh, well, I had to do it, so should you. We should be thinking, I had to do that, so let me give you a hand.
Yeah.
It's all about the human connection, because at the end of the day, it takes a multidisciplinary team to look after just one person, never mind the whole home or the whole of this area. So it's about everybody working together for that person, for their greater good, because at the end of the day, we are looking after the most vulnerable members of our society.
And the money's not there for them right now, because when you look at, say, children's care,
Yep.
it's all thrown at them. There's so many hoops to jump through. Every little box is ticked. The entire whereabouts throughout the entire day is written down almost every 2 minutes. But then you've got elderly where it doesn't seem as what's the right way of putting it? The microscope's like not quite zoomed in enough on it for me. It just feels like they're looking at it from afar. They go, well, it looks okay. People are they're still there. Everyone seems to be breathing. That's okay. Leave them to it. But when it's kids' care, they just seem to be scrutinised. It's like everybody, all the staff have been really pressed on all the time. But I'm not saying that it's easier in the elderly care, because it's certainly not. I know that my mum comes home covered in bruises.
Depleted.
Because she comes home absolutely battered and bruised from sometimes little old ladies, and she's just trying to change them because they've been refusing to be changed for 4 to 6 hours, and they'll keep trying and trying and trying, and all they do is get a whack in the face for it. And but even then, my mum still, despite coming back with bruises, will still come home and sob her heart out if a resident that she really likes has passed away or something like that. Yeah. But I just think there's so much more that needs to be done, especially in the elderly, and I don't think there's the money for it. It doesn't feel like it.
I think there's a sense of being written off. I mean, a lot of times, you know, the question in COVID was, you know, are you putting them on these wards, you know, to sort of let it spread further? You know, it felt like a little bit of a culling, for want of a better word. I remember my mum going in, and she went onto one ward, and I'd gone in the morning, given us a food. I'd gone home, came back to give her a lunch because I wanted to make sure she ate. And when I came back, she wasn't there, and it's like, well, where is she? And I went, she's on number 11, so I went across there, and I was refused admittance because this was a COVID ward. Says, but why have you taken my mum, who's not COVID, has got no symptoms, and put her on there then?
Yeah.
It just didn't compute for me. But having the power of attorney and their health and well-being, I pushed that down their throats, that I had a legal responsibility to ensure that her needs were being met. And therefore, there was nothing that was going to stop me from going in there. So every time I went in, I got PPE in every single time. I went in, I made sure she was fine, I made sure she had everything that she needed. I made sure she was fed and she had drinks, and then I would come out and I would go back again at tea time. But I did that because I wanted her to be sustained. If I got it, I got it. But at the end of the day, that's what it felt like. And I think that that's still the same kind of thoughts now. We don't look at our elderly as being, as I said before, a person with individual thoughts, needs, feelings, or having lived a life that's made a valid contribution to society and given their hearts and lives to families, I mean, my mum was married in 1955. She'd had 5 children by 1967. In the 70s and early 80s, she'd raised £55,000 for Arthritis and Rheumatism Council because her son had rheumatoid arthritis, and then she was an accountant all her life. She was a director of a knowledge firm for 35 years, and she still wasn't done. You know, she ended up then going to Pinderfields when it was the old hospital in order to give teas and coffees to people that were on the wards coming out of operations or the elderly wards, and bringing a smile to people's faces. And at the end of her 70s, she did the Race for Life 3 times. So she was always a person that was giving and doing. Any carer that comes to my house for the first time, I stay in the room. I want to know that you're competent.
Yeah.
I'm not giving my mum over to you because you're a carer and you've got it means nothing to me. It's the person.
Yeah.
So I always stay, and I will go in every single time if I do not feel that she's getting the quality of care that she deserves, because she can't say anything, but I can. So it's about fighting for her. Like you say, there's many other people that don't have that, but she does. So I will always maintain it, and I won't back down.
No, I think we say when people come in as well, it's like they might have got all the qualifications, but they might not have a full understanding of the situation. Obviously, you've got all the backstory of what's going on because you've lived amongst it, whereas they're only reading whatever they might have read on notes. But some people, they're not going to read all those notes that you've written, or normally you would just read a bit of an overview of the person, wouldn't you? So they're not going to know the full ins and outs. So they've got to spend time around that person to know how they work, how they think. I mean, someone might kind of think, oh well, I think they've probably not got capacity, but sometimes that fluctuates, especially with things like dementia. It's like it just comes and goes. So they one day they might be able to tell you exactly what they want. The next day they might not even have any recollection of the conversation. So
I mean, one of the things that my mum used to do is at the beginning, when we were chatting, I used to put terms on things. So when we were chatting, she'd start saying something and tell me a story, and then she'd just stop, and it was almost like freeze frame. And then she'd just carry on going, and it'd be something completely different. And I'd look at her and she'd say, "What?" I said, "Nothing. I think you just stepped next door for a minute." She said, "Did I? Oh, I am sorry." So we just used to use words like that.
Yeah.
Or when she was, I can remember seeing like a fly in the room, and you know when you get them in summer and they go around in this like dotted same thing area. And when my mum was getting up and I was explaining about the Spanish thing and going and doing this same pattern of walking, we used to call it pinballing because she was like ba-doom, 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 ba-doom. So when my son used to come in on a night, he'd go, "So what kind of a day have you had today?" Then I'd go, "Pinballing." So I'm not saying anything derogatory, and I'm not speaking negatively in front of her, but he knew what I was feeling, and it's right, I'll get you a cup of tea. Are you ready for this? And we'd just carry on. It's like sometimes it was like this suspended animation. She'd start talking with something and nodding hands, and then it would just slowly start going to a stop.
So it's almost like you say that there's that disconnect, isn't there? Yeah. There's a domino gone missing all of a sudden, right. But then it's come back. But you might have gone on a different path, Yeah. So it's it's one of those. Isn't it? You've
got to flip the switch.
Yeah, and you don't know where it's going to go. You don't know when it's going to come. You might because like my experience, like my granddad, like would be almost perfectly fine, and then you just kind of see something happen, and then you just go, wait a minute, it's something's not gone right for him. Whether he's not made a connection of something or whatever it might be, but then he might kind of come back. So it's almost like he's like gone away for a second or come back.
Gone next door.
Yeah, but then obviously as time went on, it kind of had a bit more of a reverse. Then it would kind of not be here most of the time, and then he'd show flickers of being here, like. When I go and visit him and things like that, he wouldn't make the connection of who I was. So, he passed away in 2017. so I would kind of like chat to him, and he'd chat to me and be polite because we were always polite.
Yeah.
And he'd get to a point then where he'd kind of think, feels like you could see in his eyes.
Are you going now?
I think well, there's that as well. But you
Yeah.
kind of think, I think I know you, but I don't know why.
Yeah.
And he couldn't
Yeah.
really put two and two together. And my mum would kind of say to him, "Oh, do you know who that is?" And he'd like look at me and go, "I don't know. I think I
Like
think
you
so."
should know.
Yeah, and but we wouldn't kind of force it down his throat. And then my mum would kind of explain. She just mentioned who I was, and she'd describe me as I were younger, and he'd remember me as younger. And he always called me Matthew, full name. So and he'd always put his hand like that as if I were that kind of height. Oh, it's Matthew, it's Matthew. But then she'd go, well, that's Matthew now. He's grown up, and it'd take a while, but you could see something happening,
Flickering, yeah.
Yeah, and then after a while, he'd start talking to me about football because he football obsessed. I mean, he lived into his 80s, but when he was in his 60s, he was playing football with me and my brother, and he was doing overhead kicks at 65 years old. You know, he was semi-pro when he was younger and stuff. So we'd chat about times where we'd played football at certain places in different areas and things like that, and he remembered all of that. But he couldn't tell you what he'd had for his breakfast. Yeah. But he kind of, I don't know if you experience the same, but he kind of revert back to the past all the time. So he'd ask where his mum was.
Yeah.
I've never met his mum. I've never met his mum. I don't think she's ever been alive in the time where, you know, and I'm 38, so she never. I don't think she was around when I was born, but he could still remember. And my mum would just say, "Oh, she's just gone to the shop."
Yeah, brilliant.
And then he'd forget about it and get on to the next thing.
Brilliant.
But he could remember the words to Dean Martin songs.
Yes.
Put the iPad on, and he could he could sing along to it, word for word.
The reason with that is because one of the last things for them is emotions. You know, the Alzheimer's Society describe their catalogue of memories as being like on a bookcase. So they're all your books are all stacked on. You get small books, you get thick books, you get strong books, and if you slightly move that, it's more or less the top ones that would fall off first. So if you think that they're all your memories now, and as it goes down, that it's like, you know, when you got married, when you were at school, you know, all the way back to early, it's those early things that you will remember more clearly, because those have just sort of flicked off. So songs is why we do Singing for the Brain, because it generates something that's inside that's a warm feeling. It's like if I heard a song, and you love them yourself, that it plays and you're back at that place. It could be when you were at your youth club, when you kissed your first girl. It could be a holiday that you'd taken or whatever. It's a memory, and it's the memory that you're feeling.
Yeah.
And it's association, and it's very much like that with dementia. So it's the feelings of it, and it brings joy. So one of the things that I've always done with my mum is when I'm feeding her, I sing with her. Because I used to take her to Singing for the Brain. I used to run a dementia cafe for 4 years, so she always came along with us. And when she was in the hospital, and I said, like, it was like she was in a coma, there was nothing. They tried to do a test on her for salts, which is with your swallowing and, what do you call it? Gone out my head again. Speech and language therapies, isn't it? So it's about you swallowing. So she'd supposed to be having that done, and they couldn't even get her to open her eyes. There was nothing coming through. And I said, please, will you come back and do it when I'm here? And she says, she won't do it. There's no point. There's nothing coming. And the doctor said, oh no, you must. This will surprise you. You must. And she came in, and I got my phone, and I put Que Sera on it, and I put it on her shoulder. And as soon as that, it was like she was in a coma. There was nothing coming from her. And as soon as that started playing, she just went, and her eyes open and her mouth open, and she was like, and I sang with her, for 20 minutes with different songs while they were able to assess the swallowing impact. So I am a firm believer in music being the key to everything of connection. I think that's why the home that I was on about had all these, the singer coming in, the musicians coming in, why we do the singing from the brain with the Alzheimer's Society, and why it's so impactful, because it generates something from inside. Now, you were saying about other thing with memories and not recognising you as being that you should be that size and not sort of 6 foot. So it's
I wish.
But what we do is I've got loads of books, memory books. So there's free prints, for instance. Every month you can get a free book. It's like, for the postage, I think it's $5.99, and we collate everything in there. So she's got some from when the children were younger, she's got some from when they're a bit older, she's got some all about her and my dad, holidays that we've been on, so that she can see and look through them. Some things she'll just stare at, and then at other times she'll go, look at him. And she always knows my dad, don't necessarily know anybody else. It's, for instance, one of the main things, I think, just because I'm thinking about recognition, and you're saying to yourself about your granddad not being sure whether he recognised you, they can't always get the right name. But if you know that person, like we were saying about a carer coming in, not knowing them, if you know that person, and your mum will testify to it, there's little incidents that you'll see, like if you're giving food, there might be a certain twitch of the lip, and now to offer it. It might be that they're pocketing it and holding it, but if you take a cup to the mouth, they'll suddenly swallow to take that drink. There's little techniques that you find and develop, and the eyes really are the gateway to the soul.
Yeah.
Because if you look at their eyes when they see those people, you know that they know them and they've recognised them. My son, with my mum, I don't know what it is, but he scares the pants out of her, and he does it all the time, and it's their little thing. And she might not have said anything all day, and then she'll go, "Oh, he's here," because she remembers. But it's not in a frightened way. She's like, "Oh no," like giggling and laughing. But it's just something that they've gone on. Now, she's called him the name of my dad's brother for the last 10 years. And my other son, the younger one, 10 years ago, he was 7. So he was like, well, why doesn't it make you cross? Because it'd make me cross. She doesn't even know my name. And he'd say, what does it matter? She knows my face. And that's what's important. If it's somebody, for instance, whether it's a carer or a doctor or whatever, that's actually, come in and hurt her, or done something that's made her feel, scared or unsafe, she might not know that person, she might not recognise that person, but there's something about them that's given her that emotion. That's what she will always remember.
Yeah.
So I look at those things. Knowing her and living with her all this time, it's like, I know when she's feeling really thirsty, it'll just be of her lips, or something small. If she's unsure about something, her eyes might just slightly narrow. If she's in pain, there's just something that you can tell. I mean, I've been on a video call with her when I've been away, and she's been in a home, and I've said, would you mind just doing a wee test on her, because I think she might have an infection. They're going, how can you tell that from looking at her? I said, there's just something that she's presenting to me that I think she might be dehydrated as well. I said, so can you give her more fluid, and can you test her weight? And I were right on both accounts. Yeah.
So it's when you've seen and experienced it, and I think when you talk about like a new carer coming in at times, sometimes they will probably benefit from shadowing you for a couple of days.
Absolutely.
Just see how you do things, because you know exactly. Sometimes you can almost predict what's coming because of the behaviour that's starting to present before
that's come before, yeah. But I think that's the thing. That's why, and what I was going to say earlier, and I missed my footing, was that when the new carer comes in, I always introduce her to my mum, and I'd say that life story of her, because I want her to see my mum as a person first, not a dementia, not who she is at this point, because I noticed in myself that, and I'm always self-evaluating. I want to be the best that I can be, whatever it is. And so when I started doing the Dementia Cafe, that came out, I think it was 2015. I ended up doing a course which was 24 was it 24 weeks, something like that. It was called Principles of Dementia. It was 24 weeks long, and it was with St George's in Lupset, and they'd kindly, allowed me to onto this course to do this, so I could look after my mum and it would benefit her. And so even though I was absolutely snowed under with 2 young children, looking after my mum, and 2 houses to look after, 2 dogs to deal with, and I felt like I was making myself coming backwards. But the manager came in and said, we're thinking about running a dementia cafe, but we don't know anything about it. But you guys here, you know more than anybody. Would anybody be prepared to volunteer? I would not the person that would be doing that, and I'm certainly not the person that had the time to do that. But somehow my hand just voluntarily went up as though it were, a balloon filled with helium. It was hanging up there, and it was like, what on earth are you doing? But it was the most rewarding 4 years of my life, because everything that I'd learned, everything that I was experiencing, I could now impart into so many other people. And it wasn't that they wanted to necessarily have their problems solved. It was to listen, to hear them, to see them, and for them to no longer feel invisible, that they were on their own. That was a major thing. But I did note that because I didn't know the people that they were looking after, I just saw them as who they were that day. So I didn't have that background.
Yeah.
So I tried to find it out so that I had a place to talk to them about those things. But not everybody has the time to do that or the inclination to do that. But it's back down to the humanisation thing of it again.
Yeah, I see a lot of people, they almost, they appear scared to talk to somebody with dementia, or not just dementia, various conditions like learning disabilities and things like that, because they're terrified that they might say the wrong thing or upset them and things like that. So they end up, like you say, just almost ignoring them or just giving them one words every now and then, rather than actually having a conversation or asking them questions or trying to find something else about them.
I think the thing is, it's down to, again, the perception, isn't it? This is what drew me to write the book. So it was a twofold thing. It occurred on a morning where I was at a point at one of my lowest ebbs possible, and I was taking my mum to the toilet for about the 15th time because she hadn't been able to go. And suddenly she was representing as a child that had been put on the potty for the first time and knew no idea what she was there for. She'd no idea what she had to do. She'd suddenly forgotten how to use the toilet. And I was going back and forth supporting her every half hour so that she didn't have an accident. And I knew she'd, in herself, in her normal self, she'd been mortified if she'd actually had an accident. So I was persistent. And it wasn't just that. There were many, many, many things. This was before I'd had abilities to be able to do any other training or be able to give talks or to do any courses and things. I felt so alone. I felt so isolated. I felt that nobody knew that I was here coping. And I sat down on this step and I absolutely sobbed my heart out. I felt broken to the point of being soul destroyed. And it was like, God, I can't do this anymore. Like, where do I go? What do I do? Pretty much, as you've said, that people get to a point that they feel that they've got to relinquish that responsibility and give it over. That was me. And I was absolutely devastated and torn from my head to my heart. and the impact that it was actually having physically on my body and my mental health. Because at that point, I didn't even want to get up on a morning. When my eyes opened, I didn't want to be here. I just thought, God, not again, please, not again. And then when I went to bed on a night, I just wanted to carry on sleeping and didn't want to wake up because of the things that I was having to face. And I won't go into them because I wouldn't degrade my mum in that way. So it was bad. And I sat there that morning crying my eyes out on my own, broken. And I didn't know what to do. And I remembered that when I was 16 and my friend had passed away, I hadn't been able to tell anybody how I felt. And I'd just started writing. And I wrote a poem, which I didn't think was particularly brilliant, but it was just me getting my words out. And that ended up being read at her funeral, which was a massive honour for me. And I recalled it, and I thought I just need to write down how I'm feeling, just to get it out. You know, this same thing about anger, displaying it not at the person but elsewhere, so that, you know, that they're not at arm's length. Because at the end of the day, although your individual has changed, you haven't. So people beat themselves up for the emotions that they're feeling, or it can become contempt if you don't deal with it. So here I was feeling all these emotions with nowhere for it to go and no one to talk to. I'd got nobody, and my sons were too young to be telling them how I was feeling and putting that on them. So I just wrote it all down, and that was it. I carried on with my day, didn't think anything of it. The next morning I got up to have a shower, and halfway through that shower these words just started coming, and I'm thinking, oh, that's interesting, that's really good. And it wasn't something that I was necessarily thinking or deciding upon. It was just started pouring out, and I thought, I need to write that down. So I started writing it down, and I started writing down, and it happened for 10 full days, every morning, just when I got in the shower. And I noticed that I was feeling a lot better for getting that out. And then after the 10th day, I thought, I'm going to read back to see what I'd actually written. And as I was reading it, I just thought, oh my gosh, that is so on par with what other people are probably thinking as well. Now, I remembered, I don't know if it was 2012 or 2014, that there was a study done by Alzheimer's Society that 850,000 people in this country alone were living with dementia. I thought, if that's 850,000, how many carers is there that are looking after those people? How many members of the family are there? And that's not even all the professionals that are dealing with dementia. And I thought, oh my gosh, you can't just sit here and have that information and do nothing, because like me in my situation, those people need to know that they were on their own. And if I could normalise what they were going through, what they were feeling, share some of my experiences, and perhaps signpost them to help, or to give them reassurance, or give them techniques in how to get through certain navigate through certain problems, then I had no right to not do. I didn't see myself as having any form of any ability at all, but I felt with my faith that God was showing me, this is what you need to do. So I had a responsibility, and I had to step up and step into that calling and continue. So I basically took a year of all the things that encompassed so much, and I put it all in there. At the end of it, I prayed about it. I looked at different people, because I thought, a little bit like transitioning from college to a workplace. How do you get this writing to a book? How do you cut a record? How do you get on TV? It's like this. Oh my gosh, it just seemed mental. So I looked at it, and I went through all the different publications, and they kept saying, you need a literary agent, you need to do this, you need to do that. And I thought, no, I don't. Mine's God inspired. No, I don't. I looked through, and I picked 2 publishers out, and I just sent it. And I just thought, if it's meant to be, God will open those doors. And 6 weeks later, I got a letter through from Austin Macauley, and I could not believe it. I looked at it, and it wasn't just the fact that it was accepted, it was the language that they'd used, that it was like a fly-on-the-wall experience, that the words in which I'd used, my ability to put things into perspective, like it was somebody was walking along with me, that it was an educational tool, and so much more. And within it, because the Alzheimer's Society and Carers Wakefield, who have been absolute such a source of information, a tower of strength and support, I put acknowledgements in to them because they'd helped me on my journey. They'd given me opportunities to talk at different functions, whether it was the Mayor of Wakefield, whether it was the Looking After Me course. They'd given me so much opportunity to come from what I was to become what I am. So I wanted to acknowledge their support, and I sent them a book. And the CEO, Justine Bilton of Carers Wakefield, she came to my house to see me. And we sat for 3 hours talking about dementia, talking about my mum, talking about everything in general. And she said, "Do you know what, Julie?" She said, "I think that this book has got the potential to change how we see and view people that are living with dementia." She said, "It's gold." She said, "I'm telling you, this is where we should be looking, because we flip the coin. We're not looking at their inabilities, we're looking at the capabilities. We're not looking at what they're losing, we're looking at what we've still got." Because that's what mistake I'd made. I was, to begin with, it was almost like I was trying to catch running water through my fingertips, or getting a sieve and it's just pouring back out. And I said, there's got to be a way. There's got to be a way. So I'd step back and I think, yeah, if I fill that bowl and submerge that will fill with water. So I can do this. So I would always look at different ways. And if I could put that into the book and send it out there, then I could help everybody else. So that's my reason for putting it down on paper and for trying to make a difference, because I had nobody making a difference in my life, so I know what it feels like.
It's almost, in a way, like a bit of a guidebook for that people, isn't it? But what you've just described there, that immediately shone through in the first 5-10 minutes of us speaking. The looking at it, the positives and what you can do, rather than just going, right, we've been fed this shit sandwich and we've got to look at all the doom and gloom, and we're basically just riding a conveyor belt to the edge of the cliff. You're looking at the journey and the positive things and the memories that you can make, and the little achievements on a daily basis. Absolutely. And that's the thing that really kind of struck a chord with me at the beginning. I was like quite fascinated, to be honest, because I've never looked at it that way. The idea of someone giving you some news, like whether it be dementia or some other kind of disease or illness, you immediately just think of that endpoint. No one thinks about, well, there's this time, and time's really precious, isn't it?
It's incredibly precious.
Everything else doesn't matter. Like this room's full of shit. It doesn't mean anything. There's stuff in here and it means nothing, because it's all what you can, your memories, that they're the most precious parts of your life, really.
It's all we've got. The relationships are so amazing. You bring your children up, and when you might be thinking, oh, I can't wait till they leave, and I'm sick of picking this up and sick of picking that. When they've gone, that's what you're going to miss. It's looking outside a box. For my mum, one of the main things that a couple of people have asked me about, and that is, so her name is Joan, and one of my thoughts at the beginning, because I always think further ahead and try to put what I would put a little bit of scaffolding in, put some trainer wheels on, let's see, and see how we can manoeuvre this. And if it don't work, then put a bit of padding at this side then. But it's always about how we can, not how we can't. And I remember with my mum thinking, and hearing about other people that they hated the fact about dementia that their individual had forgotten them, they'd forgotten who they are. Again, that's perspective. They might not know your name, but they probably still do know who you are. If you've treated them badly, they're going to know that, and that's probably why they're reacting the way that they're reacting. So it's still down to self. But one of the main things was about that, if my mum didn't know me, because we have this, such an amazing strength. She was a strong woman. She taught me to be a strong woman. She was compassionate. She taught me that. She was forgiving. I'm still trying on that one. But, you know, it was laid down for me. So it was the thought that if she didn't know me, that would be a sacrifice too much. So I knew that I had to protect myself, but I had to protect her, because I couldn't imagine, and it's about putting yourself continually in their place. If I was there in a care home and somebody came to see me, saying, "Come on, Mum, we're going to do this. Come on, Mum," and I don't know that person, that's going to really distress me. Like, I don't know you. Go away. What are you doing? What are you doing? Yeah. And that can be when aggression comes into it, especially because you know them and you're comfortable and you're grabbing them because that's what you've always done to help them stand up. That's not what they're feeling. So we have to go with what they're feeling, what they're thinking. So I remember watching The Notebook, and the family came in to see her, and she'd been very lucid and chatting, and then suddenly she was like, "Oh, I don't know who you are, what are you doing?" And she didn't know them. And the distress that lady portrayed was very, very real to me. And I didn't want my mum to be in that predicament. I didn't want to be hurt seeing her distressed at not knowing me. And I didn't want her to be distressed, you know, me trying to fight her to get to know me. So we took the best option. I started calling her Joan. I no longer called her Mum, because I didn't want that to be something that, you know, I was using. So I called her Joan, because one thing that they never forget is their name. So I called her Joan, and the boys started, they were grandma, and they'll start bringing Joan in bit by bit. But the way in which, so she that's what we do. So it totally prevented me being upset and her being upset. The way that I've dealt with a lot of things is to take my emotions out of everything, to step back, to analyse it, see what's the best for her, and give her and meet her needs. But the other thing is, I viewed her as being, Joan is the person that she was before dementia. Her middle name is Emmeline, so Emmeline is who she is now. It's just another facet. You know, we've all got different things that we might behave one way when you're on stage. You might behave another way if you're introducing somebody, or if you were your mates down the pub. Or we have different facets all the time. This is a different one for my mum.
Yeah.
She's still the same person. She's still all those things that she ever was. She just happens to have a diagnosis of dementia. It's not her. It's not the definition of who she is. It's just something that she has. Emmeline is who she is, and she's still lovely. She smiles continuously. The one thing that I've always said, bearing in mind of we were saying about aggression, if somebody was grabbing me and trying to make me take my top off, I would think that they were trying to assault me.
Especially if you don't feel like you know them.
Yeah.
But it's that confusion, isn't it? If you're dead set in your mind that it's 4 p.m, but it's not,
yeah, exactly,
and everyone's telling you that you're wrong,
yeah, exactly,
but you're dead sure,
absolutely,
you're going to think you're in some kind of like prank or a movie or something like that. So you're going to start getting frustrated, yeah. And if it goes on for enough time, everyone's got a boiling point.
Absolutely.
The person's still there. The dementia's it's just like a brick wall. They're just yeah. behind. The person's behind it all. We just don't see it. That's all. They're just not presenting it at the forefront. We're just seeing snippets of things, or sometimes not at all. It might just slip through the cracks every now and then.
Go with the flow. That's one of our biggest sayings. Just go with the flow. No pressure, no stress. today has enough things in it that you don't need to worry about tomorrow. Let's just deal with today and let's make the most out of it in whatever that is. And if it is a day where, we can't go out, or it's throwing it down, or we can't do this activity because we haven't been to the shop, so what? Just do something else. It's not rocket science. It's not difficult. The only pressure that we put on is upon ourselves. There doesn't need to be any.
So the title of the book then, what inspired that?
So The Secret Back Door, it comes from the thought of when we're out and about, like if I'm doing my shopping or if I'm driving a route that I've done so many times, I'm on an autopilot. So although yes, I'm watching the road and I'm doing everything automatically, I've got this little door, as we all have in our head, that we just slip into, and we think all different stuff will, we might save the world as we're just sort of thinking about doing stuff, whatever it is. So it's that little door that we go into, our own thought world. With dementia, it's a little door that they go through but can't always get back out of. So the book itself is I'll just show you that bit because this is my mum's copy, which is why it's in a case.
Well, make sure you hold it where you are as well, like just so we can make sure you're on the camera for the people watching.
This is called The Secret Back Door, and in the light at the end of the corridor. So it's got a corridor that goes here, and in there is loads of sealed doors, and that's the confinement of all the memories that are behind those doors that the person, which could be for any kind of mental illness at all, compartmentalise and put in. But with dementia, there can often be banks that are sealed that they can't access.
Yeah.
So the secret back door is the door in which we go into in our autopilot state that they can't get out of sometimes, or sometimes go in and out of. And some people end up being completely comatose. So yeah, so that's why it came, and obviously it's a lady, but yeah, bless.
Oh, that's amazing. So I always like to approach the end of the podcast by asking you what advice you would give to your younger self.
Oh my gosh, run a mile. Younger self, how young? How many years ago are we going?
Well, that's completely up to you.
That's a really, really hard one. I think just always have faith in yourself. Have faith in yourself, and if you know you're on the right path, march down that path with your head held high, be strong, and don't look back.
That's very good advice. Now, I want to say thank you very much for being here and chatting to me. It's been quite a privilege to listen to the story. You tell it very well, and you're very much. It's almost like you just see an obstacle and you just karate kick it down and just keep doing it, no matter how many times it keeps appearing. You're the first person that's made me genuinely tear up a little bit during a podcast, and not just for laughing at a silly joke. You seem a very incredible lady. I'm very pleased that you've come and had a chat with me. So thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to come and share.
No problem. And I'm going to put the link to the book in the description to these podcasts and the videos. So make sure you check it out, everybody. It's called The Secret Back Door. Thank you very much, Juli Flintoff.
Thank you.